So for 11 years, I've been making YouTube videos about small business deals, and I haven't made one yet about customer concentration risk. Can you believe it? Well, today, that's what we're going to be talking about. So stay tuned.
I'm David C. Barnett, and you're tuned in to Small Business and Deal Making, the podcast, YouTube channel, and blog where I talk about buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium sized businesses while controlling risk. So, if you're looking to take control of your future through buying a business one day, or if you already own a business and you're looking to grow or exit, you've come to the right place. I talk about interesting things, I talk to interesting people, and I answer your questions every week right here. So, be sure to hit like and be sure to hit subscribe, and let's get to it. Are you thinking of growing your business or beginning a journey into entrepreneurship? Take a shortcut to success by buying an existing and profitable business the right way. Visit businessbuyeradvantage.com and learn more about my online training, group coaching, and consulting services designed to help you win.
All right, customer concentration. What on earth does customer concentration mean? Well, simply put, it's when a large percentage of the business or revenue of a company is coming from one or a very small handful of customers. And so this is not typically something that affects businesses that serve consumers. You know, if you're a restaurant, for example, lots of different people are coming and going. One of those people could move out of town and you'd never see them again, and it wouldn't have a material impact on the business. But in the world of business to business enterprises in particular, customer concentration risk can be a real hazard. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, this is when you have one or a few customers representing a large percentage of the revenue. And I'm going to give you some more specific examples here. And buyers of businesses and lenders see this as a big risk factor because, of course, things happen in business that cause customers to leave us. And if one customer, for example, represents 20, 30, 50% of the revenue of a business, then the loss of that one customer could effectively kill the business. And people are very aware of this. Buyers, in particular, are tuned into this. Bankers are very tuned into this. And so, if there is a concentration of customers, what are the problems that can come from that? Well, number one, you have a riskier business, which it can be interesting because in the eyes of some sellers, they don't necessarily see or appreciate the risk because they've been living with it for so long, and because they may intimately know that customer and realize that there's a lot of important reasons why that customer would never leave them, for example. And they have a hard time communicating these things to a buyer. A lot of the times, too, these sellers with a lot of customer concentration risk don't have the same kind of balance sheet that a buyer will have. So they don't have the same degree of leverage, for example. So if a seller did lose one of those big customers, they might be able to survive that. But somebody buying the business and having a big bank loan may not. And so this is where we get a sort of a difference of opinion between buyers and sellers sometimes in some of these deals. So let's talk about what sort of, and the result of this customer concentration is that financing opportunities can be limited for buyers. Negotiation can become more difficult between the buyers and sellers, and it can lead to lower valuations or deal structures that sellers don't like, right? So for buyers, when I'm talking with them, I'm often talking about the risks of customer concentration. For sellers, I'm often talking about how this will hamper their ideal exit if they want to sell their business, for example. So I've got it broken down here in my notes for a couple from different points of view. So, first of all, let's talk about red flags from a buyer's perspective. So, if one customer is a big chunk of sales, say 20 to 25% of revenue, um, and a lot of the costs in the business are fixed. So there's a lot of fixed overhead, for example. And let's say that business has a 10 or 15% net profit or SDE margin at the bottom of the income statement. The loss of that one customer will mean that revenues will drop. And because so much of the expenses are fixed, you can't adjust them quickly enough. It will certainly guarantee that the profit of that year will be wiped out, for example. This is why it's seen as so risky. And so if one business, though, is say 50% of revenue, then it's a real serious risk. The question that I ask, or I encourage buyers to ask when they're meeting sellers for the first time, is what percentage of revenue do your top 5 customers represent? And I think that's a better question than much of a percent of sales does your top customer represent? Because your top customer could be, say, 10 or 11% of sales. And a buyer might think, well, that's not too big. But if the next four are 10% and 9%, right, in that close area, then you've got 5 customers representing 50% of revenue almost. So it's still extremely risky because if you lost a couple of those people, then you'd still be in a really bad spot. Um, so a lot of people though will then focus on contracts or non-contractual revenue. So people will say, "Well, I know there's a big customer, but we have a contract locked in for 4 or 5 years," for example. And this is what kind of makes me smirk a little bit when I'm dealing with buyers in particular who don't have experience operating businesses, because they will assume that because there's a contract there, that like this somehow guarantees the revenue. Uh, and here's the reality of business is you can have a contract and you can have two parties that absolutely respect the relationship and respect the contract, and you could still lose that revenue. And this is what new people to the world of business don't get. As an analogy, I would direct you towards your cell phone contract. So you have a contract with your cell phone company, right? And how do you behave in that relationship? I mean, some people have a contract with their cell phone company and they just decide not to pay it anyway, right? They just don't perform. Some people have a cell phone contract and get into a car accident and unfortunately pass on. The, the cell phone's not going to be paid anymore, right? Like there's all kinds of ways that that cell phone contract won't be honored. And there's similarly in the world of business, there's all kinds of reasons why a contract between two companies won't ultimately end up resulting in business. So I actually believe that if there's a handshake deal or what they call a 30-day contract, it can actually represent greater strength in the business than if there's a contract. I'll give you an example. So I've helped on several occasions over the years a client who's in the garbage business. And in the garbage business, a lot of these dumpster companies will sign people up for like a 12-month contract, right? And every year they come around and maybe they try to put in a price increase or whatever, and they try to sign up customers for these 12-month contracts. And what happens is when the customer gets to the end of their contract, they get, a phone call from their salesperson or whatever. They then feel an obligation to go shop around and see what the best deal is. So the fact that there are 12-month contracts actually creates a volume of churn because customers feel obligated to go shopping because they know that this is their one opportunity to get out of the deal, right? So my client, who I've helped a few times over the years, he doesn't do that at all. He does 30-day contracts. And basically what he does is he says, look, on the first day of June, I'm going to mail you your bill for June and you have to pay it by the end of June, by which time we will have fulfilled our collection of your rubbish over the course of the next few weeks, right? And and he said basically he says, if you don't want to do business with us anymore, tell us by the 20th. So now by the 20th of every month, people have an out, right? So what does that do then? Well, basically, it takes the urgency around shopping for more competitive garbage removal and takes it from something that's got to be done this week to something that is now so low on the priority order because everybody knows they can get out of it any time. Any month they want to, they can get out of it, right? And the fact that they can get out of it whenever they want actually holds value for some customers because some customers don't want to feel that they're locked into a contract, right? So he knows that there are people who are paying him more than what the 12-month contract people have offered. And they're with him because they like the flexibility. And I've done this myself where for example, with internet at home, there's always a deal if you sign up for several years, and then there's like the regular pricing if you're just month to month. And I've been at different points in my life where I've been hesitant to lock myself in because I thought maybe I'm going to change. And so I'll go with the monthly one instead, even though I'm paying more because I'm actually paying for the flexibility. And then a year and a half later, I realize, hey, I'm still paying this higher price. Just, but there's value in it for some people. Now, um, the real risk in customer concentration is not anything that can be managed by a contract, in my opinion. The real risk is that the customer goes out of business, right? That they just close. So you can have all the biggest, longest contract you want, and if somebody goes out of business, it's just not going to be there's not going to be any more revenue from that person. There's also um, these shadow risks, I guess, or unseen risks, and we've talked about this before with respect to certain specific industries. But I want you to imagine this: imagine that you have a trucking company and you're in a town near the forest and there's lumber mills, right? And you've got 25 different customers, but you're hauling lumber for all of them, right? And so what then happens to your business if you have any kind of downturn in home building or some kind of disruption in the economy, right? That the demand for wood. So you might have a diversified customer base, but you're still concentrated within one industry, lumber, right? So this also represents customer concentration that people don't necessarily see all the time when they're looking at a business. But I think that in addition to understanding what the customer concentration is, I think you need to broadly understand the industries or the sort of second order derivative risk amongst the client pool. So if you're doing business amongst a group of people that are all in the same industry, then even if you have a diversified customer base, you could still face the same kinds of risks that if all of them have some kind of downturn, you're going to get less business. Um, so if there are industry dynamics, like in business to business, for example, concentration is more common and more dangerous um, than it is in the business to consumer world. How does this impact the way that buyers are willing to pay for businesses? Well, there's definitely an impact on valuation because people that are more frightened about long-term sustainability of the revenue are going to be willing to pay less for your business. So buyers will often then want to discount these future earnings. They'll want to build in some kind of margin of safety that one of these customers could go away, for example. They might try to manage this through deal structure, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. If the customer concentration problem is too extreme, there are buyers who will simply walk away, especially after they've talked to their banker, which we're going to get into next. Deal structure is often the way that buyers try to manage these risks. And a lot of the times, sellers just don't like the deal structures that get proposed. So I'm going to give you an example here as I talk about the lender perspective. So a lender, a banker who's going to make a loan to someone to buy a business, they're very interested in that business and the business's history, but they want to make sure more than anything else that the business is going to be able to afford the payment back to the bank. That's the number one goal that the bank has. And so there, for example, in the US, we've got the SBA, and the SBA has rules about customer concentration that go on top of the bank's own individual rules about customer concentration. So having too much customer concentration can lead to flat out loan denial, like, no, we won't finance this at all. Lenders want to see diversification. They want to see, some kind of guarantee about the ability of the cash flow to continue. Lenders are probably more likely to favor businesses that have those contracts in place, right? Even though, in the example I just gave you about the garbage company, there could be a very strong argument to not have contracts. Uh, Lenders often they want to know, okay, we want some kind of runway here where we know going into the future what the revenues are going to be, because if people stop renewing the contracts, not everybody cancels their contract at once, right? Not every renewal date is the same. And so the idea is that there's some kind of runway of warning that if customers all of a sudden stop renewing the contract, you've got maybe several more that are going to be renewing over the next year or so, you've got some kind of time frame ahead of you where you understand, hey, we got to make some changes to this business. Something has changed in the marketplace, competitor, some other factor or whatever. So let me tell you a quick story about a company that I consulted with down in Boston. So this was a glass company of some kind, and they were supplying people that were building homes. Okay. And so they had one big customer that was 40% of their revenue. And the buyer that I was working with was trying to make an offer to buy the business. And we spoke with a banker, and we were able to get an SBA loan for this business. Now, here's how we did it though, is we said, what would this business look like without the big customer? And, the direct costs, cost of goods sold would obviously be lower if they were doing 40% less business. And we were also able to say, if we did 40% less business, these other costs would be gone. We'd have a lower workforce. Our, costs for trucking and auto and all that kind of stuff will be lower. And we kind of went through and we said, this is what the business would look like if it was 40% smaller than it is today. And it would still be profitable at this smaller revenue figure, and we believe it would be worth this amount of money. And basically, it was like less than half of what the overall business was likely going to be worth if we were ignoring the customer concentration problem. And so the bank really liked that insight into the business, and they approved a 90% loan of that smaller business amount. Okay. So basically, they're like, we'll lend you based on the diversified business, but we will not lend to you based on this one big customer. So that 90% loan for the much smaller scaled business without the big customer uh, was less than half of the overall price. Guess who financed the other part? Right? It was the seller. The seller had to finance the other part. And that kind of shares the story of the risk mitigation strategies that buyers tend to use when there's a lot of customer concentration. So, a deal structure that makes the seller bear part of the risk of that one big customer. So, um, earnouts or holdbacks of some kind to basically ensure that the big customer continues to do business with the new owner. That's usually part of these deals. Usually, much higher degrees of seller financing than what people hear about in the typical small business deal space. People will hear about these 5, 10, 15% seller notes. When you have a large customer concentration, it would be perfectly normal for someone to ask you to finance 40, 50, 60% of the deal. And I've seen that happen. I've also seen scenarios where there have been multiple seller notes, where some seller notes are tied to specific customers. So this is a way of offsetting or changing the deal after the fact. So if I buy the business today and there's one customer with 20 that represents 25% of revenue, I might make one big seller note tied to that customer. Maybe the payments on the note are tied to the revenue from the customer. And then if that customer goes under, guess what? A percentage of zero is zero. There's no more payments made on that note. And effectively, what happens is the buyer then gets a discount on the business, even though the sale happened some time ago in the past. And let me tell you, sellers hate this because what sellers say is, business is risky and I got this big client and we enjoy the profitability from this client and I should be rewarded for that. And, if I hand the business over to you and you mess things up, Mr. Buyer, then why should I have to suffer the penalty of your mismanagement of the business? Like that's legit the seller's point of view. And here's the deal is yes, um, you've done all those things for sure. But for a buyer who doesn't know as much about the business as you do, um, they have to mitigate that risk in one way or another. And so what does that then mean for the seller? It means you got to pick the right buyer. You actually have to take more of an effort in making sure that you underwrite this buyer's ability to run the business successfully so that you'll be able to be comfortable with the fact that they're going to take over this relationship with the seller and that they're going to continue to operate the business in a profitable way. Now, what are the odds of finding just the right person amongst the pool of strangers who might knock on your door if you put your business up for sale, like on one of these websites or through a business broker, right? Now, like, as a seller, you completely lose control almost of the process and the timing of this exit, because now you're relying upon just the right person to step up and come into this scenario. So if somebody had a business with a high degree of customer concentration, what would you do then to try to get rid of that problem? Well, there's two essential strategies. Number one is, years before you plan to sell, deal with the concentration, get more customers, spread out your business amongst more people. Even if you start adding a whole bunch of really small accounts, it shows that you're able to get more accounts and you're diversifying to some degree. That's one strategy. The other strategy is to sell your business to somebody who understands it as well as you do, which means that you hire somebody who come in and work with you in the business, who ultimately could become your successor. And that person builds up all the same kind of comfort and knowledge about the business that you have as a business owner. And they get to develop a relationship with that big customer to the point that they feel comfortable with the whole scenario. And then maybe they don't see the need for the same kind of discount or deal structure that someone coming from the outside might see. Obviously, that takes a lot more planning, right? And it takes a lot more work. It's a multi-year strategy in most situations. And this is why you can't wait. Like, the whole idea of just like, I'm going to run my business, and when I think I'm going to be ready to sell, I'll just put it up for sale. Like, that attitude or that idea is everywhere in the small business world, and it is truly dangerous because as a seller, so much of the value that you've built up in your business can just evaporate if the right person doesn't show up at the right time with the right skills and want to do the deal the way you want to do it. I mean, we work with people that to help them avoid that kind of problem. So, for sellers, start diversifying years before before you want to sell. For buyers, the way to get around some of these risks is during due diligence. If there are 3 or 4 customers that represent like a huge chunk of the revenue, I would definitely make it a requirement in due diligence to meet those people. Like, and sellers again aren't going to like this, but you need to know that you are going to be able to continue those relationships. And I like you want to understand in particular the switching costs. What are switching costs? So switching costs are the cost to a customer to change suppliers. So if we're talking about trucking, for example, and all the trucking company does is they go to the customer's factory and they load up and then they go and deliver the stuff. Changing to a different trucking company is relatively easy, right? If you are a supplier of high-tech manufacturing equipment that also includes servicing and maintenance contracts, and the customers have spent millions of dollars on your gear and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on maintenance and upkeep contracts, that's a lot harder to switch, right? Especially if, like, you're the dealer or whatever, and they can't find another supplier of the equipment that they just spent millions of dollars on. So that's a very high switching cost kind of thing. That customer is going to be much stickier, right? So it's harder for them to switch. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about switching costs. The more difficult it is for the customer to move to somebody else, the higher the likelihood that they're going to stick with you. I would also argue that the amount of cost that you represent in your customer's value chain is also important. So if what you supply to the customer represents like 1% of what it costs them to deliver their product or service, then you are probably very low down the order of concerns or scrutiny when it comes to their cost control methodology. Versus if what you're selling represents like 50% of what it costs them to do as far as what their business is, they're always going to be looking at that cost because it's such a huge component of what they have to in turn charge their customers, right? They're always going to be scrutinizing it. And so this is why, for example, if you manufacture something and sell to Walmart, like Walmart's cost is basically real estate to have the store, it's the employees to make the store run, and then it's the stuff that they buy to resell to people. And they can't really control wages. They can, a lot of their people are minimum wage. Uh, Wages go up over time. They can try to hold back the cost as much as possible. Real estate is all negotiated up front. They sign a lease or they build a building, whatever it is, that's kind of stuck. The only thing that they can actually work on as far as their costs is what they pay their suppliers for the goods. And so this is why you have famously, Walmart is famous for this whole cost rollback, continuously pressuring suppliers to cut reduce costs, etc. And so if that's your scenario, like if you're the supplier to Walmart, then you have to realize, hey, we're going to be under constant pressure to have our margins squeezed versus somebody who is selling, the little rubber gasket that goes into the lawnmower engine at the lawnmower factory, right? That we represent such a tiny portion of the cost of that lawnmower that we're going to be the last people they look at when it comes time for examining their cost structure. In my opinion, that's ideally where you want to be. So, um, let me think here. Let me see. So, if you do a deal like this as a buyer, then you really have to make sure that you land hard on those relationships, that you really get in there and create relationships with those customers because they are such a big, important part of the business that you've just acquired. And make the sellers share the risk with you. It's the only safe way that I can think of. So this would mean some kind of earnout or some kind of royalty or some kind of seller financing with subject to offsets for those big customers, for example. I want to highlight something. This is just a notion or a concept. In preparing for this video, I like to ask myself some strange questions. So I said, what if you had 100% customer concentration? Like, what if you had a business and you only had one customer, right? What really is that? And I realized it's not a business at all if you only have one customer. What it is you simply are an outsourced department of that business. Like they've outsourced it for some reason. Why would they outsource it? And there's only one reason I can think of for a company to outsource one of their functions. It's because they think that through outsourcing it, it can be done more cheaply. And that reminded me of a video I made years ago about buying Federal Express routes, like these FedEx trucking routes. And I made that video after looking up the FedEx purchasing department's policy or working paper, whatever they have in their website about their basically their acquisition of trucking services. And I pointed out in that video that Federal Express is not selling franchises. They're not helping to set people up in business. What they're doing is they're trying to control the cost of moving goods from point A to point B in their network. And one of the ways that they've identified to do that is to basically create these opportunities for other contractors to come in and haul stuff for them. And it's all about reducing costs. And so a business with one customer is really just an outsourced provider of service. And the reason you've been chosen to do that is because the company wants to pay as little as possible, right? And uh, from there, you can just go upwards. So if you have three customers or if you have five customers, it gets better and better. But you can see the risk here involved if you get into something like that. And I point this out all the time to people in that FedEx trucking space. You're buying a business from someone with only one customer. Like, how wise can that be? And people lose their minds when you point that kind of stuff out because they all think it's golden and it's solid and it's good forever. I think there's serious exposure to general economic activity with a business like that. If the economy goes down and fewer products are being purchased or shipped or what have you, then obviously the volumes are going to go down. And if the volumes go down, the number of truck departures or whatever is going to decrease as well. So there's risk in all of these things. Anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed that. I would remind everyone that if you are going to buy a business, you should head over to businessbuyeradvantage.com. Check out our online training program. It's been recently upgraded here in 2025 to version 4, and we're getting all kinds of great positive feedback about the the improvements we've done there, including a whole slew of AI tools that have been now included in the program. And if you own a business and you're thinking about getting out in the next few years and you want to have an idea of what an exit might look like, head over to howtosellmyownbusiness.com. There's a great resources there that you can access for free. And we can actually help you do an evaluation of your business and show you what it would sell for today. And a lot of people have gotten us to do these, and they come back every year with updated financials and we redo them. It gives them a scorecard moving forward about how they're doing as far as growing value in the business. And a lot of the times we can point out some low hanging fruit of ways that they can earn more money, greater cash flow, and improve the value of their business. But a lot of these sort of easy things can still take years to implement. And so that's why it's important to get started today, not to wait until the day you decide you want out, right? Ideally, you keep your business prepared for sale all the time. And what that means is you end up with a business that is easier to run and own. And with that, I will say thank you very much to everyone for tuning in. Sorry I didn't make a video about customer concentration sooner. And if there's some other topic that I have managed to miss, please leave me a comment down below. I look forward to your comments every week. It gives us all kinds of ideas about what kinds of videos we need to make. And with that, I'll say see you later. Cheers.
So, how can you learn more about buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium sized businesses? Easy. Go over to my blog site, davidcbarnett.com, where you can learn more about me and how I work with my clients. You can learn more about my books and courses that I've prepared for you. You can find out how to subscribe to my email list, the YouTube playlists, and more. There's literally hundreds of hours of content there, all for free, and I'd love for you to be my guest. Special thanks go to Mark Willis at Lake Growth Financial, today's video sponsor. Mark helps people better manage their personal and business finances through the Bank on Yourself insurance strategy. This is something I've done personally and I've seen others use it successfully for years. Go to newbankingsolution.com to find all the interviews I've done with Mark and learn more about the advantages of these programs. While there, sign up for a free consultation to learn what this solution might look like for you.